Om Shri Guru Pyo Namaha, Om Namo Narayanaya. So the topic that we would discuss today is why read the Puranas. And this is an important topic because nowadays we find, even as there is a resurgence of interest in Hindu spirituality and Hindu philosophy, there's an overall decline in knowledge about and interest in the Puranas. You would find that there aren't many good English translations, for example, of the Maha Puranas, other than the Srimad Bhagavatam. The attendance of kathas that discuss the Puranas is also on the decline and is mostly for the elderly generation. There is some interest in the Itihasa, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, but vanishingly few people are interested in the Puranas. This is not just about reading the books, but also learning and transmitting the embedded vidya and the associated lifestyle. So it's not that in the past generations would actually read the texts of the Puranas necessarily themselves, but they would hear about it from their grandparents, they would attend kathas, or through traditional forms of storytelling and dramas, they would hear and learn the stories and the wisdom from the Puranas. But nowadays, as people become more and more alienated from their Hindu heritage, that knowledge is no longer there that one can learn through osmosis as they used to in the past. So one question about this is, why does it matter? So what if the Puranas are lost or we become unfamiliar with them? The Puranas are vitally important to Hinduism. They are the classics of Hinduism. In addition to the Adhyatmic wisdom that is in them, there's also priceless information about our civilization, our sacred geography. There are great detailed descriptions of our tirthas and our sacred places. The Leela of Bhagavan, our vratas like the Satnarayan Katha, all the different stotras we recite, all of these come from the Puranas. They have the forms and objects of Vapasana and meditation, very detailed descriptions of our devatas that are used in the temples and for Vapasana and for the Bhakti Marga today. There are also discussions of dharma and philosophy, descriptions of nature and the ecosystem of ancient India. As a whole, you get a worldview and a cosmology, not just Earth, but all the planets, the worlds, how to think about the appearance and dissolution of the universe and the cosmos. This all comes from the Puranas. And I actually wanted to start with just an example from the first part of the Markandeya Purana. It's just a very small passage, but it shows you how much is packed into our Puranas. So in this passage, Jaimini has gone to the Vindhya mountains to visit certain birds. These birds also have a special story behind them, which I don't have time to get into in the same Purana. But in short, they were wise and virtuous birds. And it is said that those birds remain there even today, engaged in tapas and dhyana, having made their minds up to meditate. So Jaimini sees the birds reciting and reading perfectly, sitting on a slab in the mountain. And the birds greet him. They fan him with their wings and they say, "O Brahmana, we hope that all the animals, birds, trees, creepers, shrubs, groves of bark and grass in your hermitage are well. Or perhaps by asking this, we have shown disrespect towards you. How can those who are with you not be well?" This quote is actually from the Vivek Debroy translation of the Markandeya Purana. So much is packed into that tiny incident, actually just that fragment of an incident, about the nature of sadhana, about nature and the care given to each blade of grass, each sentient being that came to an ashrama, and an acknowledgement that under a rishi's care, all things prosper and are comfortable. It also tells you how a hermitage should be, the conduct of a rishi, how sadhakas practice austerities, how to greet wise ones. Now, if you were trying to explain that in the abstract, that would take you a long time and it would be boring and dry. But by just telling it through this form of a story, there's so much packed into that we can instantly grasp and understand. The Puranas literally mean that which is ancient and old. If we lose this connection with our classics, our pantheon of devatas and our sacred literary heritage, we lose a lot. We would face the same fate that other pagan civilizations have faced. If you think about the great Greek epics, the great Greek gods, and where they've come to now that their epics are treated as dead texts. You have someone like Ajax, who was a great hero in the Iliad, the great Greek epic, and now that's actually been reduced to a brand of a dishwashing detergent here in the US. Or think of Thor, the great Norse god of thunder and the sky, and now he's just become a comic book character and a film character in the Marvel franchise. That is what happens when the source texts become just stories, become dead books, and are no longer taken as sacred or relevant, even if they are read. The whole religious edifice collapses and the civilization becomes stagnant and eventually dies. The Puranas are our equivalent of this embodiment of our sacred heritage and our civilizational heritage. It's the edifice that holds together the different sampradayas and darshanas of Hinduism. And if you think about it, most of the worship that we do, most of our religious practices come from the Puranas. I mentioned the Satnarayan Kata, the Satnarayan Vrata, all the different vratas that we do, most of them are sourced in the Puranas, the stotras that we recite, etc. And now, even as there is an interest in exploring meditation and yoga, they tend to be divorced from the Puranas or from the Shastras, or they tend to be very abstract forms of practice. Including if one just studies Vedanta without having this grounding in the Puranas or the religious structure of Hinduism. And we lose this connection with dharma. And without that at the base, nothing else within Hinduism will be able to properly grow and flourish. So for the rest of the talk, I wanted to address certain misconceptions about the Puranas that are out there that I think are keeping people from truly appreciating and delving into the Puranas. So the first one is this idea that the Puranas are a degradation or corruption of Vedic literature, or that they're a much later creation that is actually in opposition to the Vedas. So Swami Tapasyananda of the Ramakrishna Mission has done a wonderful 4-part translation of the Srimad Bhagavat. And in the introduction, he discusses the Puranas and also the place of the Srimad Bhagavat in the Puranas. And there are some interesting pieces of information for us there. So he mentions that the word Purana literally mentions narratives of ancient times. And while what we know as the Puranas today came to be in present shape from the 5th century BC onward, there was an original Purana or a nucleus known as the Purana in the singular that is as old as the Vedic Samhitas themselves. So the earliest mention of Purana in the singular sense, it comes from the Shatapatha Brahmana. It is also there in the Gopatha Brahmana, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And in that Upanishad, it is stated that the Purana sprung along with the Vedas and the Itihasa from the breath of the Mahabhuta or Paramatma. And to quote from Swami Tapasyananda, we have to infer from this that the Purana was a branch of Vedic learning and not a separate and diversified religious literature that it came to be in later days. The recital of the Purana, consisting of traditional lore about creation, ancient histories and anecdotes, proverbial sayings and genealogies of kings and rishis, traditions about the origin of Vedic mantras and sacrifices, etc., was a regular practice during periods of interval between the rites and ceremonies of protracted Vedic sacrifices. So the Vedic revelation remained fixed and unalterable, while the Puranas, which embody the philosophy of the Veda, cast in a form and against a background that are their own, multiplied into a vast body of literature during a period extending at least from the 6th century BC to the 12th century AD, embodying the devotional teachings of numerous cults and saintly teachers that arose from time to time, as also much available information on a variety of scientific, occult, social, and historical themes. So in other words, the Puranas have always been a part and parcel of Vedic literature and the Vedic system, and there is no opposition between the two. They are truly what is known as the Panchama Veda, along with the Itihas. It's worth spending a minute on what actually constitutes a Purana. So there are 18 Mahapuranas and many Upapuranas. In order to qualify as a Purana, it must have certain lakshanas. So according to the Amarakosha, there are five following subjects have to be addressed in the text: Sarga, Pratisarga, Vamsha, Manvantara, and Vamshanucharita. And I'm going to go into those in a moment. But the Bhagavad Purana itself actually gives a definition of 10 qualities of what makes a Maha Purana, and that actually goes into a little bit more detail. So by Sarga, what is meant is the evolution of the undifferentiated Prakriti into Ahankara and all subsequent categories ending with the gross elements. Visarga, or secondary creation, is about the latent tendencies or karma of creatures becoming manifest. Then there is Vritti, the description of the system by which the living creatures live and earn their livelihood. It also includes Sthana, the worlds and continents of the earth forming the residence and support of creatures. Fourth is Raksha, the account of the incarnations and grace provided by Ishvara and the Poshana of Ishvara for devotees. Fifth is Manvantara. That is the description of the combined activities of the Manus, Devas, sons of Manus, Rishis, and others for promoting the well-being of all creatures in Loka Sangraha. Vamsha is the descriptive lists of great royal and priestly lines, and the Vamshanur Charita is about the genealogies of distinguished kings and their dynasties. Then Samstha is the description of the 4 kinds of dissolution of the manifest universe. Ninth, Hetu is the discussion of the root cause and significance of all creative activity. And finally, Apashraya is the ultimate support of Bhagavan in a metaphysical sense. So when we discuss the Puranas, we're discussing literature that address all of these topics. And then you can see how it fits into the Vedic superstructure. So the second key misconception that I wanted to discuss is this idea that the Puranas are somehow lesser literature. There's this almost condescending attitude that they're meant for women and Shudras, and therefore the higher literature is other literature, and the Puranas are therefore of lesser importance. So this is a very wrong idea. Just because something is available and accessible to all does not make it less valuable. Air is accessible and available to all, but without it, none of us can breathe. Same with water. Also, Jnana and Bhakti are available to all. That does not make it less valuable just because it is accessible to everyone. In fact, that which is universally available and accessible is also universally relevant. And then you'll often find that the Puranas, they talk about when they are recited, a rishi asks a question about something or wants to know about something, and then the reciter of the Purana begins to answer and unfurl the Purana. A lot of these tellings are set in the sacred forest of Naimisharanya. So Naimisharanya is the birthplace of many Puranas, actually, and this is where sages have gathered to gain knowledge for realizing the self. And it is said that there are 2 places on earth where today still immortal beings gather in the subtle realm. One is Naimisharanya and the other is Kailashashram. And so that also gives you an indication that in such a sacred tirtha, where the rishis themselves gathered to hear the Puranas, that gives you a sense of how elevated the Puranas are. Parikshit himself attained moksha simply by listening to what became the Bhagavad Gita. And another important role of the Puranas is forming a certain syntax that the acharyas use when discoursing on philosophy. So if you simply say the name of Yayati, or you simply say mention the term Trishanku Swarga, immediately certain stories and connotations come to mind, which is based in the Puranas. And these form a certain shorthand by which the philosophy of Vedanta or the Upanishads can very concisely be summarized. So all of our great Mahants are very well versed in the Puranas, and it is actually the deracinated Hindu or the colonialized Hindu who has become alienated and has these hang-ups about the Puranas. And so this is part of the very important function that they serve for all of Hinduism. The next item, or the next misconception I wanted to deal with, is the sense that the Puranas are just mythology or mythological stories. And this is the most common complaint that I hear about the Puranas. So we've already seen that there's much more in the Puranas than just stories, but let's set that aside for the moment and let's assume they are just stories. This aversion to stories and what we call mythology is also part of a Western colonialist disease. In fact, in all ancient cultures, in all traditional cultures and civilizations, storytelling was itself sacred. The actual definition and origin of the word mythology comes from the Greek word mythos, and that was later translated into Latin and then came into English. And what was meant by mythos is anything transmitted by word of mouth, such as a fable, legend, narrative, story, or tale, especially a poetic tale. A story or set of stories relevant to or having a significant truth or meaning for a particular culture, religion, society, or other group. And that was transmitted in the oral tradition. So if you think about it, actually, our Puranas does meet this definition of what is considered mythos or mythology in the original sense of the word. It is just that it's gotten an unfortunate association with mythology being somehow false or fictional versus what the original essence of the word meant. And we have become Christianized into seeing it as false stories or fictional stories that are therefore somehow not true. And that is supposed to be contrasted against that which is history, something which has literally happened or claimed to have happened. And this kind of conditioning is actually very, very dangerous and is more a response to Western thinking than anything that was there in our tradition. So for us, what is Sat or what is true is not history-based, and this is something that Rajiv Malhotra has talked about a great deal, but it's very important for us to recognize and understand this. So what is Sat to the Rishis or the Acharyas is not about whether something happened in the distant past and we can put a date and location to it and we can prove it. It is what can be directly experienced and realized by us in aparuksha jnanam, what can actually be directly experienced for us here and now. That is what is Sat. So if we take an example of this, in the Bhagavad Purana, there is the story of Gajendra Moksha. So we all know this story. Gajendra was the king of elephants, and one day he stepped into a lake, and a crocodile grabbed onto his foot, and he was being dragged into the water. And at that moment, in distress, he called out to Narayan, and he recited a beautiful stotra, and he offered a flower to Sri Narayan, and then Narayan came and rescued him. So when we're thinking about this katha from the Srimad Bhagavat, it doesn't matter whether there was an actual elephant named Gajendra, and we have to go and find out where he lived, when he lived, and prove his existence through fossils or something like that. The point is that there is a greater truth in that story, whether or not it historically happened, which is that in our own lives, even if we have forgotten Ishvara, even if we have not done a lot of sadhana in the past, if in a moment of distress we sincerely call out to Ishvara, he or she will come to our aid. That is the significance, and that is what is considered truth or reality, and that is the meaning and relevance of these stories from the Puranas. I also wanted to talk about this importance of storytelling from a modern perspective. So there has actually been a lot of research into this, and there's this book called Wired for Story by Linda Cron, and that actually goes into the neurological and evolutionary aspects of storytelling and why it is so important. And this again relates back to the Puranas. So to quote from that book, again, this is from a very modern perspective, but it tells us how prescient our rishis and acharyas were in understanding the importance of the Puranas and storytelling. And the quote is, "Neuroscientists believe the reason our already overloaded brain devotes so much precious time and space to allowing us to get lost in a story is that without stories, we would be toast. Stories allow us to simulate intense experiences without actually having to live through them. This was a matter of life and death back in the Stone Age, when if you waited for experience to teach you that the rustling in the bushes was actually a lion looking for lunch, you'd end up the main course. It's even more crucial now because once we've mastered the physical world, our brain evolved to tackle something far trickier, the social realm. Story evolved as a way to explore our own mind and the minds of others, as a sort of dress rehearsal for the future. As a result, story helps us survive not only in the life and death physical sense, but also in a life well lived social sense. So again, this is the modern view, but actually this hews very closely to our traditional understanding of the role of stories. So there's a Sanskrit Shubhashita that says, there are 3 ways to learn that if you touch fire, you will get burned. One is that you are told once that fire burns and you realize that, and that's it. The second is that you see others getting burned by fire, you see their suffering and their pain, and then you understand the truth of the matter. And then the third is that you actually touch fire yourself and you get burned, and sometimes you get burned multiple times before you realize this. So in this framework, the Uttamadhikari is the one who is told once, or who understands immediately that this is the nature of fire, and doesn't have to be told again, and doesn't have to experience it for himself or herself. Most of us are not Uttamadhikaris, but hopefully rather than being burned several times, by reading stories and by seeing what happens to others, we understand and internalize these lessons, and they take us towards that realization and that wisdom. So that again is part of the role of the Puranas or the sacred stories, is to give us these insights into the nature of ourselves, the nature of the world, the nature of metaphysics in a very accessible way. And then I would also say even our Upanishads are very full of stories. So the Katha Upanishad, for example, is full of stories. So this idea that something is just a story and therefore not somehow inferior is a very wrong idea, and it's a very modern idea that's not there in our traditional system. One thing I want to say about this is there is a distinction between the Puranas and just normal storytelling. So for example, there's a distinction between the Puranas and something that you read in Harry Potter. One, in Harry Potter or fiction, or even the greatest literature, you're reading about something. It's a secondhand experience, and it doesn't necessarily transform you or create something around you. On the other hand, the Puranas are not something you just read. They're something that you actually experience. So the ways in which we conceptualize, relate to, envision, and worship our devatas all come from the Puranas. So it is said that the Srimad Bhagavatam is actually Sakshat Bhagavan. It is an embodiment of Sri Krishna or Narayana himself. And when we read parts of the Puranas, it's not just for reading, but they're actually points of Upasana. So the meaning of Upasana is to sit near. And even in the Vedas, you have the Karma Kanda, which is about the rites and the Vedic practices, the sacrifices that one is enjoined to do. And then before you get to Vedanta, or the Upanishads, which are about the abstract metaphysics and the darshanas and philosophy. In the middle, you have the Aranyakas, or the parts about that relate to Upasana. So it's the bridge between the yajna and the rites, and to abstract direct realization of Vedanta. And the idea is that you meditate upon. It can be in a devotional sense, that you're meditating upon a form of Ishvara, of Saguna Brahman, or you are meditating upon certain abstract concepts, so it could be something like there's a description of Gandha Madana Parvata that comes in the Puranas and the Mahabharata, and just simply meditating on that, certain experiences, certain realizations come. or on certain deities in forms as prescribed in the Shastras, including the Puranas, and then that closeness to Bhagavan comes. And then in Upasana, so you have the seer, the object of the scene, and the process of seeing. And as the Upasana progresses, the barrier between the three drops, and there's an identification among them. So the Puranas are really meant in this sense. In other words, they're not just stories you're reading about, but through Upasana, through sadhana, they actually become part of your inner reality. It constructs an entire worldview around you. You can envision the cosmology. You can envision how this material world appeared, how it'll one day dissolve. The worlds of Kailash, where Shiva lives, where Devi lives, what Vaikunta is like. And by meditating upon them and by having this upasana, they become part of something you can actually directly experience for yourself. And I actually just wanted to give two examples about that from my personal life. So one is that in the Shiva Purana, there's a very detailed description given of Shiva and Parvati's wedding. And the place where that happened is actually, even today, if you go to the Himalayas, there's a place called Triyugi Narayan, and there's a very ancient temple there. And the fire from their vivaha is still burning there today. And so when I got married last year, so it'd always been my thought that if I get married, I would really like to get married there. And we were blessed enough that happened. But when you're there in a devotional mode, you really do feel like this is indeed where Shiva and Parvati got married, and you can feel that bhava that they were there, that they have blessed this place, and it becomes part of your experience, it becomes part of your sadhana. And without the Puranas, or without that katha, without that association of a particular tirtha with the Sthala Purana, you lose out on a lot of the meaning or significance of it. So this is another way. So the Puranas, it's not something I read or a story, but it's become part of my life in a very real sense in that way. And then the other thing that happened a few weeks ago is someone had asked a question that, why is it when Krishna was born, Yogamaya's parents were so willing to give her up just to save his life? And is there some kind of misogyny there? And that was a very funny question to me, because that's not something I'd ever read in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So I went back to those passages, and it is very clear when you read about the birth of Krishna, and then Vasudeva he understands that he is to take Krishna across the Yamuna and place him in Nanda Maharaja's house, and then bring Yogamaya back. So actually, Yashoda Mata, Nanda Maharaj, they never know. They think from the very beginning that Krishna was their original child. So there's no thought, there's no question of giving up a daughter for a son or anything, and any such nonsense like that. And actually, Devaki, when Kamsa takes Yogamaya, Devaki protests a lot in a very poignant passage. But anyway, my point was, when I was reading these passages, this is a story that I've known for a long time. I've read it many times. But that particular day, when I was reading it, I was just very wrapped into those passages, and it was like I was seeing before my eyes Balagopal, baby Krishna, being born, how Vasudeva and Devaki felt. Then when the shackles come off, and then all the people in the palace fall asleep, and then they cross the Yamuna, and the strong waves of the Yamuna actually subside to allow Krishna and his father a safe and comfortable passage. And it was something that was very absorbing and brought me closer to Shri Krishna. So even if you read these stories many times, there are new depths, or there's new relevance or significance it'll have to you each time. And that's really what the point of the Puranas are. It's not something that you just read once and you're done. It's not that you just go to one Bhagavad Gita for 7 days and then you're done. You keep coming back to them again and again, and each time you go into it more deeply, and it has a deeper resonance and deeper meaning for you. And then the last misconception I wanted to deal with is the sense that, yes, the Puranas are there, they're nice, but we're short on time. Isn't it better that we focus on the Prasthanatraya, or we focus on Vedanta rather than going through all of this mythology? And this is another kind of pervasive sense that is out there. So today you'll find there are a lot of discussions and classes and workshops on Vedanta, and very little on the Puranas. Maybe a little bit on the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, but very little on the Puranas. And this again is kind of based on these misconceptions that we have. So actually all of the darshanas, all the forms of Vidya can be found in the Puranas, including Advaita Vedanta. The Srimad Bhagavatam itself has many passages that are either very similar to or actually verbatim passages from the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. And all the Puranas are meant to expound a particular philosophies and darshanas within them. So you can find all of that within the Puranas itself. And beyond that, the Puranas have a unique role, which is an essential role, not just a helpful role, but essential, of providing a superstructure and a framework or a foundation of dharma, lifestyle, practices. And that is very necessary, that religious superstructure, to ground any practice of abstract yoga or Vedanta or philosophy. Is you need that superstructure or that foundation. And nowadays we often find that these things are being taught, like yoga or Vedanta, without a sufficient grounding in this structure. So as I mentioned before, most of our religious practices today really come from the Puranas, which are a continuation of Vedic rites and Vedic forms of worship, just adapted in a different way. And without that grounding, we're really not able to get to the higher stages of adhikara that are necessary to go directly into Vedanta. So there's one verse I really love from the Naishkarmya Siddhi by Sureshvacharya, a shishya of Adi Shankara. And this is verse 1.52. And he describes very beautifully the progression that one goes through or should go through in life. And in that verse, I'm just reading the English translation, it says, the performance of nitya karma yields dharma. Dharma destroys papa, or demerits. Then comes chitta shuddhi, then the understanding of samsara, then vairagya, then mumukshatvam, then the search for the means of moksha, then the renunciation of karma and sadhana, then yoga pyasa, then the introversion of the chitta, turning the chitta inwards, then the understanding of statements such as tattvamasi and the other mahavakyas, then the destruction of avidya, then abidance in the atma alone. So in that you can see there's a very natural and beautiful progression, but the starting point is always nitya karma. And nitya karma means the daily duties or the daily puja one is supposed to do. But you can think about that more broadly as sadhana. And from that comes dharma. So this concept of dharma is very important. And if we just focus on spirituality without a grounding in dharma, that spirituality will not take. So dharma is something that is individual, and it is something that is at the societal level, and both are very important. So dharma means that which holds or that which sustains. So there's a dharma for our own lives, which creates a harmony and a balance, and it takes us through the four purusharthas of dharma, artha, kama, moksha, and it leads us towards moksha. And then at the societal level, for loka sangraha, or for the well-being and support of the world, again, dharma is needed. Dharma is that which holds everything together, and we do not have enough emphasis nowadays on dharma. And the Puranas are actually a great source of understanding dharma. So they're the Dharma Shastras, of course, but they may be difficult for a lay reader to understand. But if you read the Itihasa and the Puranas, then it comes very naturally through these stories, through a worldview, an ethos that comes across. You can learn how you are to deal with the guru, how to treat other people, how to treat the living creatures of the world, how to live in this world. And that focus of those fundamentals of dharma, as shown in this verse, are the very beginning and the starting point. So many of us try to come to step 9 out of 10 or step 8 out of 10, and it doesn't work unless you've gone through those preliminary phases. And actually, even if you just think of the word Vedanta, it means the end of the Vedas. So it's assuming you've already done the Karma Kanda, you've already gone through the Aranyakas, you've done Upasana, and now you are ready. And if you just hear the Mahavakyas, it should go through. But many of us, most of us, almost all of us, we are not at that stage. And the Puranas give that grounding and that structure. And in and of themselves, like just by reading the Puranas without ever going through the Upanishads, one can also get jnana and parabhakti, or it can at least be a good preparation. And it's not, again, I would say it's something that is essential at the individual level, and also at the societal or civilizational level. And there's actually one other story I wanted to share in that regard, and this story comes from the Chandogya Upanishad. It's the story of Indra and Virochana. So once Indra and Virochana approached Prajapati and they wanted to learn Atma Vidya. So for 32 years they went through austerities to purify themselves to be his shishya. And then Prajapati addressed them. He said, look at yourselves in a cup of water, and then whatever you do not understand about yourself, come and ask me. They did so, and they went back to him and they said, we see ourselves as we are. Prajapati then asked them to dress themselves up with the best of clothes and look again in the water. They did so and reported to him what they saw. And then he said, that is the self, the immortal self. And that was it. And they both went back to their respective abodes. And Prajapati said to himself, they both go away without having perceived and without having known the truth of the self. And whoever of these two, whether the Devas or the Asuras, will follow this doctrine will perish. So Virochana went back to the Asuras, and he said, with a satisfied heart, the self or the body alone is to be worshipped, and so on. And he was satisfied with that. Indra had thought the same thing, but before he went back to the Devas, he had a certain doubt. He wasn't able to become convinced about this notion that he had. So he went back to Prajapati and again went through another 32 years of discipline on austerities. And then he thought that the dreaming self is the true self. And then he was dissatisfied with that. And then he thought the self in sleep is the true self. And again, he felt dissatisfied, and then he did austerities for 101 years. And then he finally learned that the real self is above all of these stages. And the story is there. And actually, when I first read the story, I thought, oh, it's very clear. The point is that Virochana was wrong, and he had not understood the guru properly, and that was the lesson. And actually, yesterday I was discussing this with my guru, and my guru said, "No, think about it more deeply. In a sense, Virochana was not wrong, and the idea is that what Virochana saw had some truth to it, but it was not the complete truth. It was a very low or crass level of realization." This quote came to me in Buddhism. There's a very famous saying that says, "With great doubt comes great realization." So what it means is that oftentimes, like in Buddhism, one is given a koan, like a saying, like "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" And that is not meant for just intellectual ratiocination. It's meant to create a certain churning within the self, or to generate a certain doubt within oneself. So it's said in our shastras, for example, that to really learn the truth about Brahman, you have to be like a headless person, like someone with their head cut off. That's the level of urgency and importance that this vidya must have for you. And so this idea of it's not just enough to hear the words or to have an intellectual thought, but to have this this sadhana, this insight into higher levels of realization. That's really what's being conveyed through the story from the Upanishad. And what it also says is that it's very dangerous just to think that you can read some words or read some lines and you will have gotten the truth the way Virochana did. You will get something, but that will not be the full realization or the full truth unless you are truly prepared for it. And what the Puranas do is it prepares the ground, and it orients the mind, the psyche, and it gives you the superstructure so that you can actually absorb those truths and those realizations at the higher or the highest levels. And it's not just the Puranas, reading the Puranas, but it's the sadhana that comes with it. And so you need that sadhana, you need that orientation, you need that shraddha in order for those Mahavakyas to be truly internalized and realized, and not just sitting on the tip of the tongue. And then one last point I'd like to make about the role of the Puranas is not all of us have mumukshatva. Not all of us are necessarily looking for moksha in this lifetime. The Puranas cover all the 4 purusharthas. There are beautiful, like I said, there's beautiful passages of romance, of love, of world affirming or life affirming paths of dharma that are relevant for each of us in our journey in this lifetime, which again makes the Puranas special and relevant to all of us. And then the final part of what I want to talk about is how should we read the Puranas. So I've gone through the misconceptions, and hopefully now we understand that we should read the Puranas, but then how do we read them? So the first point on that is not to just read them, but to live them. So there's you can call it a Puranic lifestyle, but there's the aspects of sadhana, there's the aspects of dharma, of an ethos and a worldview that comes after you read the Puranas and you internalize it. And the more we immerse ourselves into that, then the more we will get out of that. So for sadhana, that can be things like doing the vratas. So if you're in the Shiva Purana, there are many different vratas given for worshiping Shiva, such as fasting on Mondays and other things. Then as a Vaishnava, you could have Satnayan Kata, Ekadashi, fasting. All of those vratas are given in the Puranas. I had a grandfather of mine. His only practice was doing the Chandipat, or recitation of the Devi Mahatmyam, and he would do this every morning from 4 in the morning for an hour or two, and it would be so nice to listen to. And that was all he did his whole life, and that was enough. You don't need anything else. So there shouldn't be this idea that the more Puranas I read or the more texts I read, the more I will learn. It's more about, if it's better to pick one text and then go very deeply into it and hold on to it, and that will do it for you. It's very important to read good authentic translations, or better yet, to read the text in the original Sanskrit themselves. So Gita Press is a very good source of translations into Hindi, some into English. I've mentioned Swami Tapasyananda's translation of the Srimad Bhagavat, which is also wonderful. It is also important to have shraddha when you're reading the Puranas or reading any of the of the Shastras. And Shraddha is it's a very special, very important concept. It's not blind faith. It's the idea that this is something, this is a guru, or this is a shastra, this is a text that I have reverence for, that I'm going to honor because I recognize that there's something that I'm not understanding, that I can understand through this. So anytime you read, actually, particularly in fiction, there's this idea of suspension of disbelief. So you're going to give the benefit of the doubt to this text or to this person, but it's not just blind faith. It's the idea is I'm going to suspend my disbelief. I'm going to go into with an open mind. I'm going to have faith in it. But the idea is at the end of it, someday I will have that direct realization for myself. Someday I will experience it for myself. Someday it'll be my own realization, not just parroting someone else's realization. Maybe not in this lifetime, but in another lifetime, one day that'll happen. And that kind of shraddha is very necessary when you are reading the Shastras and also the Puranas. So when you open the pages of the Srimad Bhagavat, you should really feel that you're reading a direct embodiment of Narayan himself. That is the level of Shraddha one should have. Associated with that is this idea of being a Hamsa. So you say that the Hamsa is able to, when it drinks, it's able to take the milk and leave behind the water. And this is a kind of subtle discernment of when you're reading something, what is the relevance for you? What does it mean for you on that day and that time of your life? So to know what you should read, with which attitude, all of that comes through this idea. And so oftentimes this is where being with a guru or being with a teacher makes a big difference. You can read the text yourself, but it's better to read it under the guidance of a guru or a master. So I gave the example about the story of Virochana and Indra, and how in a very short dialogue with my guru, I was able to have a different realization from it. So that is also important. These are living truths and living texts, and it is through a guru, through sampradaya, that they really become, that you can understand the relevance and the meaning of it for yourself. And in the end, it is really this attitude that is everything. And whether, like I said, it's not about reading all the Puranas or reading all the Shastras, but even if you read one passage from a Purana, if you have the right attitude, that is enough. And that's the last story I would like to conclude with, which is one of my favorite stories. So this is that once Narada was on his way to Vaikuntha to see Narayan. Along the way, he came across an old sadhu. The sadhu stopped Narada and told him to ask Narayan how much longer he had to wait to attain moksha, as he had been doing his sadhana for so long already. And Narada agreed to do so. After some time, he came across someone else who was a young man dancing and singing under a tree. And Narada didn't say anything to him, but he decided that he would ask Narayana about him as well. So he went to Vaikuntha, had darshan, and returned. And he came across that old sadhu again, and he told that sadhu, you have 3 lifetimes left before you get moksha. Then that old man became so angry, he threw away his mala, he threw away his books, and he complained that this was very unfair, as he had been practicing for so long, and Narayana was just being unfair to him. So that was that. Then afterwards, Narada went to the young man who was still dancing and singing under the tree. And he told that young man that he had to be born as many times as there were leaves on the tree under which he was dancing to have moksha. And hearing this, the young man was ecstatic, and he began to dance and sing in even greater frenzy and joy and gratitude. And he asked, so soon? There are so many trees in this world and so many leaves, only this tree and these many leaves? And he asked Narada to convey his gratitude to Narayana for having such grace upon him. And at that very moment, the young man attained moksha. So whether one is very far along the path or only in the beginning stages, what really matters is one's attitude. And if you have that right attitude, then whatever you're doing in whichever phase of sadhana you're in, you can have moksha at that very moment. So this is a story that I had heard many years ago from my guru, and over the years it has really stayed with me. And at different low points in my life, at different low points in sadhana, I have thought about that story. I remember that story and that young man. And again, it's not just something I read about or listened about, but something that's very, very real to me. And I've thought if he had that kind of attitude, I too can have that kind of attitude, that as a sadhaka, there's always hope, there's always reason for gratitude. There's always this understanding that Ishvara's grace is upon us. And that is the most important thing. And really, that is what the Puranas are meant to do for us, or these stories are meant to do for us, is we come back to them again and again, and they can be transformational for us in key moments in our lives, the more we reflect upon them and go into them. And I hope that you may forget a lot of what I've said in this talk, but I think some of these stories you will remember. And that is because that is what the Puranas are and how they live on through us. And that is why they're so important and essential. So, dhanyavad.